Welcome back to the second day of the Brynn Sewalong. Today we are going to be hemming our Brynn and then we are going to be attaching the neckband. This is going to be for all of the views and all of the lengths. I'm sewing up view A, so the sleeveless view, and I'm going to be doing everything today on that view, but everything that I'm doing today, like I said, is for all views and all lengths. Now the first thing that we need to do is we need to turn up the bottom hem by 5/8 of an inch. Now I have sung the praises of Heat and Bond soft stretch before, and I'm going to be using it on this Brynn, and I'll go ahead and show you how I do it here. So essentially I just run the bottom edge of the soft stretch along the bottom edge of the Brynn. You put the non-paper side down against the wrong side of the fabric, and you just use your iron to fuse it to that bottom edge. You're going to want to give it just a little bit of time to cool down, and then once it's cool you can pull off the paper backing, and it leaves this, you know, just kind of like sticky stabilizer that is still a little bit stretchy, and then you can just fold it up at the top edge of the soft stretch, which is 5/8 of an inch wide, which is how much we're turning up the hem by, and then you use your iron once again to melt that soft stretch so that it fuses the hem in place and you don't have to use pins. Obviously, if you do not have some kind of fusible hem tape like I do, you can just fold up the bottom edge by 5/8 of an inch and pin all the way around. And then we're going to go over to our sewing machine, and using a stretch stitch we are going to stitch about a 1/2 inch from that bottom folded edge all the way around. Okay, and it should look something like this when it is done. Now you want to go ahead and grab your neckband, and we are going to sew it right sides touching at that top edge. And you can tell it has the top edge because there is a notch there at that top edge. Now make sure you decide which side is going to be your right side. I'm actually going to do the flat, which is actually the back side of this fabric for both the armbands and the neckband, just so it has a little bit of a contrast from the ribbing on the main part of the Brynn. So with right sides together, I'm going to pin at that top edge, and then I'll go over to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it at a normal 3/8 of an inch seam allowance using a stretch stitch, but you can also of course use your serger. And then you are going to press those seam allowances open if you stitched on your regular sewing machine like I did, or if you serged it, just press those seam allowances to one side. And then find your interfacing pieces, and the very bottom ends of your neckband on the wrong side, you are going to fuse that interfacing. And there are little notches on both the interfacing and the neckband. Go ahead and match those up, because sometimes your neckband pieces might stretch a little bit and you want to make sure that they're not doing that. This interfacing is pretty important because it not only makes sure that you are able to sew buttonholes and buttons on them, it adds that stabilization, but it also just makes sure that this bottom portion of the neckband does not stretch at all. So there's only stretch around the neck portion or the top portion of the neckband, but this area right here along that center front edge does not stretch. Okay, now take those little bottom ends of your neckband, and with right sides touching, you're just going to fold those little bottom edges together. You can put a little pin in there, and then we're going to go over to our sewing machine, and at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we are just going to sew that very bottom edge. You could probably do this with a straight stitch if you want. You just want to make sure that you get a really nice clean stitch and that it is parallel to that bottom edge. Okay, so it should look something like this when you're done. You are going to just trim any bulk as needed, depending on how thick your fabric is, depends on kind of how much you need to do that. And then you're going to turn those corners right side out, making sure that you get a really nice right corner there at the bottom. And then you are going to press those, and then go ahead and press the entire neckband all the way around so that it is in half, wrong sides touching. Okay, perfect. So now that our neckband is all prepped and ready, we are going to pin the neckband to the garment neckline with right sides touching. And you just need to make sure that you are matching notches and that the bottom edge of both the neckband and the hem line up really, really well. Keep in mind to be extra careful that that bottom section of the neckband does not stretch at all, but once you hit that bust notch, then you do stretch between that bust notch and then the shoulder seam and then the shoulder seam and the center back. I would be pretty generous with my pins here. You might want to add a lot of pins where you're stretching in between or along the neckline just to make sure that that distribution is even. Also, I put lots and lots of pins on that section where it does not stretch below the bust notch. Especially if your fabric has any vertical stretch, it can sometimes want to grow while you are stitching it. And so putting lots of pins in it will help that not to happen. Now, one little tricky bit is always that very bottom little edge and keeping the bottom of the neckband and the hem aligned. So what I actually generally do is I go in with a little bit of a glue stick right there in the seam allowance, and then I use that to make sure it is perfectly lined. I let that glue dry, but that just makes sure that those don't shift underneath the presser foot with those feed dogs, and I have much better luck making sure that those stay lined up when I'm stitching the neckband to the main body of the Blair at that section. We're going to go over to our machine and we'll either serge or use a stretch stitch to stitch the entire neckline at a normal 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Be extra careful that in those areas where you do have to stretch the neckband to fit the neckline, that you're only stretching the neckband and not the neckline, because you do not want your neckline to get stretched out after sewing. Want to make an extra note here. Stretch and recovery on knit fabrics can really vary a lot, even if they have the same amount of stretch percentage. So if you are really looking to get the perfect fit, or maybe this is the first time you have sewn up the Brynn, we do recommend basting the seam first, and then that way, if for some reason you are getting a little bit of a stretched out look, or maybe it's a little bit too tight, you can adjust the size of the neckband as needed and then go back and stitch it again. Okay, so it should look something like this when you are done. Now we are going to go ahead and go over to our ironing board, and we are going to press the neckband away from the main garment, and the seam allowances will be pressed towards the garment. once you have this all pressed, you can actually be done for today. Tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to do the buttons and the buttonholes and just the little finishing touches. We do have one more step today that is completely optional. So if you would like to, you could run a line of edge stitching about 1/16 of an inch inside of the garment away from the neckband, catching the seam allowances underneath. And it can give like a really nice crisp look. So I'm not going to do it on any of my other views that I'm working on for the sew along, but I am going to do it on this view so I can show you what it looks like. And once again, I am just using a stretch stitch. If you want, you can probably kind of bring the width of that zigzag down